Good morning, everyone. The sitting is open. One announcement. The political groups and non-attached members have notified me of appointments to the new subcommittee on public health. The list of the subcommittee members will be published online and in the minutes. Next item on the agenda is European Council and Commission statements, conclusions of the Special European Council meeting of the 9th of February and preparation of the European Council meeting of the 23rd and 24th of March 2023. I start by giving the floor to the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. Charles, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente du Parlement européen,
Madam President of the European Parliament, President of the Commission, ladies and
the
gentlemen.
last European Council was marked by the participation of President Volodymyr Zelensky. He took part in a brief plenary session where we had the occasion to reaffirm our full support for Ukraine for as long as it takes, because defeat for Ukraine is not an option. President Zelensky then met in small formats with leaders about intensifying their direct operational assistance, especially for more weapons. To win the peace, we must strengthen our defense and our capabilities. And 3 days after the Russian attack, we took the decision to deliver arms and munitions to Ukraine, and this marked a paradigm shift. I believe this was the birth of our European defense. Strengthening our European defense means developing our industrial capacities, and this is urgently needed to support Ukraine. Russian forces have fired between 20,000 and 50,000 artillery shells per day in recent months. Ukraine needs ammunition to defend itself, and that's why we have worked on the proposal of Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas to organize bulk orders to support the pace of our deliveries to our Ukrainian friends, and High Representative Borrell has developed a concrete plan to implement this assistance to Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to see an escalation. We would like to see an escalation towards peace. But Russia has not stopped escalating the war. It would only take one decision, just one decision from the aggressor to engage in peace, to silence the weapons, and to withdraw its troops behind the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we do not see any signals from the Kremlin in this direction, and despite this, we continue to fight a battle for peace, the diplomatic battle. We support the Just Peace formula proposed by President Zelensky. It is based on the UN Charter, it is based on the respect for the international law, and we are working hard to rally the international community behind peace efforts, like we did in the run-up to the vote in the UN General Assembly, calling for the withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine territory. We also discussed, for instance, this with many contacts at the recent African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, and the High Representative went to the United Nations in New York for the vote. The resolution was supported by an overwhelming majority of 141 countries. This vote is encouraging, but the work of convincing others remains extremely challenging. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine have forced us to ask ourselves the right questions about the competitiveness of our economy, both in the short and long term. Just one example to illustrate the challenge. The EU's energy trade deficit in 2022 represented some 4% of our GDP, compared with 1.7% in 2021, while the United States has seen its surplus increase threefold during the same period. energy exports in the United States have increased by 60% in 2022. Last December, the European Council asked the Commission to present ways of helping our industry drive forward our green and digital transition, especially in the context of more targeted state interventions, including by the United States. And we have decided on our short-term strengths of action. First, relaxing the state aid regime in a targeted and time-limited way, coupled with greater flexibility in the use of all existing financial means. Second point, making life easier for our businesses by streamlining procedures and authorization. And third, stepping up training and retraining to provide our future sectors with the professionals they desperately need. But, ladies and gentlemen, we also must take action in the long term, because we cannot allow the short-term measure to undermine our long-term strategy. And this is exactly, precisely the debate we will have next week at our next European Council on the competitiveness of the European economy. And we expect the proposals requested from the Commission tomorrow. In the long term, I think we need to work on three areas: investment, innovation, and trade. First, investment. European companies, particularly SMEs, are having difficulty finding the capital they need to invest in innovation. The gap between the EU and the United States in terms of productive investment represents 2% of GDP. Another example, the EU stock market capitalization is less than half that of the US as a proportion of gross domestic product. And yet, Europeans save far more than Americans. We must close this gap, and we know the solution. There is a solution. This is called the Capital Market Union, a project whose foundations were laid almost 10 years ago, and it's now crucial that we speed up legislative work to bring this essential project to fruition, to finance our economy, to create jobs, and to ensure the well-being of all Europeans for decades to come. C'est aussi pour cette raison qu'avec...
And that's also why, together with the Commission, the President of the European Central Bank and the European Investment Bank and the President of the Eurogroup, we have publicly launched this accelerated call to work together with the market. Ladies and gentlemen, the second point we're working on is innovation. We're all aware that the Lisbon strategy set the ambitious goal of 3% of GDP, which should be dedicated to mobilizing capacities for innovation. We can see that the results have not been up to the objectives that we set. We have to do more, we have to do better. And this will also be on the agenda of the Council this week. For example, if you look at digital platforms, 90% of capitalization for the 70 biggest companies in the world come from the United States and China. So that shows how little capacity the European Union has that it can deploy in such important sectors. The third sector is trade. I want to share some reflections on trade with you. For many years, I would say that trade was a sacred instrument for the European Union. It's been able to derive prosperity, capacity, development, and to improve living conditions for our citizens. Today, we have to be very clear. We are in the Champions League when it comes to negotiating trade agreements, but we have a lot more difficulty when it comes to implementing this agreement. Since 2006, of the trade agreements that have been negotiated, most have been implemented only in a provisional fashion, not entirely, or have not been implemented. For example, in the coming months, we'll be working with Mercosur and Chile, and working with Mexico to look at a number of issues that have to be tackled face on. So when it comes to trade policy in the future, there are a couple of points we have to look at. One are methods for negotiating. We have to be able to ensure that we involve everyone who directly affected, that everyone should feel involved in the process to ensure that we have more transparency and more trust. An example of this is Brexit. We have had to make available all information that we had without any with full transparency to make sure that it's available for the Parliament, for citizens, and to allow us to work quickly. And we should use this as our inspiration for methodology going forward. Then we have to look at the substance. There seems to be a desire to want to solve a lot of problems through trade policy and negotiations, but perhaps we have to make a choice. A trade agreement can help to improve things, and that should be an objective in our trade negotiations, and that it should also be used to encourage more support around the world for the demanding standards that we want to see, for example, when it comes to working conditions or environment conditions. We should have this democratic debate, and it's very clear that the European Parliament has a key role to play here. Finally, we have to look at our future, our competitiveness, and to do that, we have to look at the relationships that we have with other key players around the world. The United States, of course, but also China. And here, in line with the treaties, the Council fully intends to shoulder its responsibilities when it comes to European Union external policy. We've had strategic debates on a number of occasions in the European Council over recent months. And a couple of reflections on this. First of all, we know that China and the United States aren't equidistant from us. We are a loyal, faithful partner of the United States, and we want to focus on our historic links, focused on values as well as economic policy, which, as we know, is also important to our security. However, at the same time, China is a key actor on the international stage, and that's a fact. And so there are a number of points that we have to focus on in our relations with China. First of all, we have to stand firm, look one another in the eyes, defend our values, democracy, human rights that are so important to us. We also have to engage to try to reduce dependency, which can be so expensive. We can see this. We saw this with Russia and energy. So to rebalance economic relations with China, particularly when it comes to strategic points for the future prosperity of Europe. And then thirdly, I don't think anyone here is in any doubt that we have to engage with China on global issues, for instance, issues relating to climate change or health. And so it's in this perspective that we will continue to work to engage in the Council with European external policy and working with the countries that we have relations with. And finally, just to conclude, on a topic of no less importance, the European Council is an opportunity to look in detail at the issue of migration. We know that migration is an issue which is leading to political and ideological tensions. It's often used to drive polarization within our societies. I think we need to be rational in analysing this issue. We know that the European Parliament is doing work with the rotating presidencies in order to ensure that the Migration Pact is properly implemented. This is the internal aspect of migration, and we in Council will also ensure that we can act and make progress on this topic in coming months. In the meantime, however, it's true that we can also do more and do better when it comes to cooperating with third countries, countries of origin, countries of transit. Cooperate more to fight criminals and traffickers who are speculating on poverty and human misery. To do more to open up legal migration channels, not leave it to the criminals and the traffickers to decide who can come to Europe. For us to take decisions respecting the rule of law to ensure that there are humane, regular channels. And so next week we'll also be having an update on the discussions on this topic since the last European Council. And to finish, we'll also have an opportunity to look at the situation in the Eurozone. We'll have Christine Lagarde, and we'll be looking at the future of the Eurozone. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we are all aware that for a number of years now, we have been facing difficult times. We have questioned many issues, but the fundamentals remain. We have to focus on our values. These should be our guiding compass in the future to ensure that we have sovereignty, strategic autonomy, that we need more resilience and have to be more influential in the world, reduce dependency. And hopefully this will be a guiding principle for all of us working on this project that is so important to each and every one of us here. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Charles. I give the floor now to the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
President Metsola Di Roberta, President Michel, cher Charles, honourable members. Last Friday, I met with President Biden in Washington. We had a very good discussion on the Inflation Reduction Act. There is a striking symmetry between the Inflation Reduction Act and the European Green Deal. Both of them are simultaneously a climate strategy and a strategy for investment and growth. Both of them include funding for just transition, and both include regulatory standards. Only on carbon pricing, a very important instrument, the United States system is still much more limited than ours. In other words, the two biggest and most advanced economies in the world are now moving in the same direction. And therefore, I welcome the Inflation Reduction Act for its massive investment in clean tech. But you might perhaps recall that we discussed it already in November. Some aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act were of concern to us and needed solutions. Now, I am happy to report that we have found solutions. On Friday, President Biden and I confirmed the understanding on electric vehicles that allows European car makers to get access to the US market and thus to US tax breaks. Second, we launched discussions on a critical raw materials agreement. The aim is to ensure that critical raw materials for electric vehicle batteries, whether they are extracted or processed in the European Union, are treated in the same way as if they came from the United States. And thus, this will secure strong supply chains for batteries in Europe and ensure access to the US market. And my third point, we started a transparency dialogue on incentives for the clean tech industry. That's good news overall. But let me be clear, negotiations can only solve some of the most concerning issues. The big bulk of work still lies with us in Europe. We Europeans need to get better at nurturing our own clean tech industry. We need to speed up. We need to simplify procedures. We need to grant better access to public and private finances. And if there's any doubt, let me give you 3 figures that underscore why this is so important. The global investment in the clean transition topped $1 trillion last year, and that's 30% more than the year before. And if you look at the global market for net zero technologies, it is set to triple by 2030. So in other words, the race is on. The race on who is going to be dominant in this market in the future. And we must get our act together if we want to stay front runners. We must nurture our own clean tech industrial base, both to create good jobs, well-paying jobs here in Europe, and of course to ensure access to the clean solutions we need so urgently. And that's what the European Green Deal Industrial Plan is all about. The centerpiece of the Green Deal Industrial Plan are two legal acts. The one is the Net Zero Industry Act, and the other one is the Critical Raw Materials Act. The Commission is proposing those two legal acts this week, actually tomorrow. Let me reflect on both. With the Net Zero Industry Act, we are setting the ambition. By 2030, we want to be able to produce at least 40% of the clean tech that we need here to fulfill our green transition. And therefore, the Net Zero Industry Act is all about speed, and facilitation. We're facilitating permitting. We're working with regulatory sandboxes. We're creating simpler state aid schemes. And we are allowing for tax breaks and the flexible use of EU funds. So, in short, the Net Zero Industry Act provides speed, simplification, and it provides funding. The second centerpiece is the Critical Raw Materials Act, which the College will also adopt tomorrow. This is about securing the supply for critical materials which are badly needed for the digital and green transition. These minerals, as you know, power phones and electric vehicles, the batteries, the chips, the windmills, the solar panels, you just name it. In other words, we cannot function without them, the critical raw materials. And the demand for critical raw materials will dramatically rise over the next several years and decades. But, and we've discussed that here in the hemicycle before, as you all know, today the European Union depends heavily on a few third countries for these strategic raw materials. Just a few examples, and you know plenty of them. We get 98% of our rare earth supply from China, 93% of our magnesium from China, 97% of our lithium from China, and you can continue this list over and over again. And, honourable members, we know that the pandemic and the war have taught us a bitter lesson about over-dependencies. So if we want to be independent, we urgently need to strengthen and diversify our supply chains with a like-minded partner. You can see exemplary there, European companies just doing just that, diversifying and strengthening our supply chains. For instance, sourcing low-carbon nickel to produce batteries here in the European Union. And Canada is not only a reliable partner, it also shares our values. It guarantees that raw materials are mined with the highest standards for the environment and for workers. So our Critical Raw Materials Act will support these efforts by European companies. We want to extract more ores and minerals here in the European Union. We want to boost our processing capacity to at least 40% of annual consumption. And of course, we need to recycle more. Again, if I may jump back to Canada, I visited a company that is able to recycle from old batteries 95% of the lithium, the cobalt, and the nickel. 95%. It's amazing to see that. Old batteries. So that's the future. That's what we have to have in the European Union. Soweit, meine Damen und Herren Abgeordnete.
So, members of the European Parliament, this is our support for clean tech companies. Now, when it comes to competitiveness, the issue is much broader. It affects our single market, and we are having two announcements to be published tomorrow. We all know that the single market is the foundation of our prosperity and our competitiveness. It's 30 years old this year, but the potential in this single market has not yet been fully exploited. If you look at various studies that look at the single market, they show that more than 7 200 billion euros could be released if we used the full potential of the single market. And this starts with the capital markets and with research and development. We know that we are strong because we have good research and development and then market development. So you know what the examples are. The mRNA vaccinations were developed here in Europe. This is how we overcame the pandemic. This is a real good reason why this was developed here. Another example is hydrogen research. There's no other place in the world where between 2011 and 2020 more patents for green hydrogen were registered than here in Europe. These are just two examples, and we really need to focus on this area. We Europeans have the goal by 2030 to have 3% of GDP on research and development. But we've had that goal for a long time. We set that in 2002, first of all. And if we look at the speed with which we are moving towards that goal, yes, we are getting closer, but very slowly. And it's not enough. And others are much faster, and they're not sleeping. Now, as our expenditure is growing slowly, our proportion in the world in R&D expenditure have gone from 41%, but they've gone down to 31%. And therefore, together with the Swedish presidency and heads of state and government, I would like to propose that this common European objective, that we increase research expenditure to look at why investment in innovation and research and development is so slow here and how we can improve on this. This is not only necessary for researchers, developers and companies, but it's also a very strong signal that we are taking this very seriously. We're taking the issue of competitiveness in the single market very seriously.
Mein zweiter Punkt.
Secondly, an issue that you hear time and time again, bureaucracy. It's Europe's companies and employees that make the single market one of the most attractive markets in the world, regardless of whether we're talking about industries, SMEs, family companies, market leaders. Their success is Europe's success. And therefore, we are doing our utmost to facilitate their work. We know that the quality of public management and the legal framework is decisive for competitiveness. And therefore, together, we are paying attention to this, and we want to have comprehensive impact assessments to ensure that Europe's laws do not burden Europe's companies, but that they support them instead. Often we know that it's not just having to provide one certain document that makes things difficult. It's the sum of all the documents that needed to be provided. Therefore, we are going to go do our utmost to see how we can improve Europe's competitiveness and what we can do without. We will be presenting specific proposals in autumn to reduce reporting obligations by 25%. This is not simple, but we must try to do that. Our political priorities are the same because they are important. That is, the European Green Deal, digitalization, and its geopolitical resilience. We set these goals 3.5 years ago. They have been proven to be good, especially during these times of crises. We want to ensure that their implementation is linked to less costs for our SMEs in particular. Now, we've shown this when extending renewable energies, how targeted legislation can lead to more flexible approval procedures. This, in future, should be the rule, and it should not be the exception. And just one final point. Europe's single market is strong. We can be proud of this. We need to do all we can to keep it strong and to extend it. But in the future, there will be some key performance indicators that will guide us in the future. They can provide information about whether Europe's economy is actually becoming more competitive, and have discussions about this. What about the proportion of private investment? What about the proportion of companies with fast internet? What about participation in training? All of this data is available. We don't need to gather any more data, but we can use this data, and using these KPIs will allow us to determine how we move forward. So it's not an assumption. We have concrete figures, evidence-based figures, and there will be a report from the Commission every year to Parliament about how these KPIs are moving.
With the war on our doorstep, with volatile energy prices and massive clean tech investments worldwide, Europe has to up its game. I am looking forward to develop the proposals we have put on the table today. This is our answer. Long live Europe.
Thank you very much. The Commission President, and now give the floor to the representatives of the political groups, starting by the President of the EPP, Manfred Weber.
President of the European Parliament, Commission, Council, dear colleagues. Good politics starts first of all with a reality check. 8 out of 10 global champions are from the US. Apple's market value alone is bigger than